Join me for a conversation with future war visionary Sean McFate.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Okay, guys, today's interview is awesome. Here it is. My guest today is a foreign policy expert, author, novelist, former paratrooper, Sean McFate. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And I could keep going on listing your accomplishments, but the short introduction we'll have to do right now. We'll fill in our guests later on. I'm sure things will come up in our conversation, and you'll excuse me if I just like sheepishly hide my resume under a piece of paper or something right now, because after reading your bio, it is very impressive. So I really appreciate you coming on to the show today. And now I reached out to you. I wanted to talk about your novels and your writing process and why somebody who writes nonfiction would want to cross into fiction. But I have learned that you were a role player back in the day. So you got to tell me, when did you discover tabletop role-playing games and what games did you play?
Yeah, I was a huge gamer. I miss it. I learned it in the late 70s when I was like, I guess in sixth grade, fifth grade. And, D&D, obviously, Gary Gygax, and, read, ElfQuest and totally into it. But then later on expanded to other sort of TSR games. And I like to play board games like Avalon Hill, like Squad Leader, and some others. Also liked Robotech, Warhammer 40,000 later on. But my problem was back then, this is like ancient. This is like the dark ages, internet wasn't a thing, and it was really hard to find anybody to play with me. And so some of this was like just solo, pathetic gaming by yourself. But I love the universes you could create, and I just found it just fascinating. I used to make my own dungeons for D&D on graph paper. I know some of you probably did that too. And of course, my D&D, dungeons were a little, relic heavy, but it was not really realistic. But I just to this day I still love it, and I wish wish I had more time to play it. I have to find out some of these platforms you've discussed with me before about how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, your story sounds familiar to me because I discovered Dungeons and Dragons when I was 9 in 1982. And yes, I drew out the dungeons on graph paper, begged my older brother to play with me after the first few times, and all of that stuff as well. But and then going through long stretches of not being able to find anybody to play with, or just stuff like that. So I totally get that, and I totally understand that. But we are in, I guess, a second golden age of role playing games right now, and the popularity is exploding, and people all over the world are wanting to play, which is amazing, seeing as how a type of game that was invented in the Midwest has now swept the globe. Really,
it's true. Yeah,
it's awesome. And so that is great that you're a role player, and it fits really well with some of the things that I wanted to talk about. So obviously the people who are listening to the podcast, we're role players, we're game masters, we're always looking for ways to make our games better, ways to add ideas and concepts into our games. And in your introduction, I mentioned kind of some of your qualifications, but you think about the future of warfare a lot, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah. That's one of my primary jobs these days. If you didn't know that was a job title, now that you do.
Yeah. And I find that fascinating. And I want to kind of dip into that a bit because, one reason is because a lot of people run near future games in different systems, or they run cyberpunk games, and they're trying to add in interesting, situations or scenarios into their games that would kind of seem plausible in the real world. But also, I mean, I guess there's a little selfish angle on this, but the future of warfare, right? I'm kind of invested because I have 3 sons and a daughter, and if there's a conflict in the future, they might be involved in that. So I wanted to kind of get your take. Maybe I could frame it this way. If you're watching, the news, or you see a TV show or a movie, or you read a book and somebody says something about, warfare, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, do you see things that just like drive you crazy and say, oh no, you've got it all wrong?
Oh, don't get me started. Yes, I do. And they're mostly retired generals at that,
oh, no.
Yeah. I think that you've heard the adage, perhaps, that generals always fight the last war, especially if they won it. Mm-hmm. That is what a lot of thinkers, what they call defense intellectuals, generals, think tankers, lawmakers, when they think about the future of war, they think about, basically the last war we won, mm-hmm. which, if we're honest, is 1945, World War II. They think about conventional war with better technology. They think about World War II with better technology. And it's like the world of Tom Clancy. You maybe have in the 80s read, Hunt for October, Red Storm Rising. His first 2 books were sort of about what he thought the future of war was, and was basically World War II with better technology. And no nuclear weapons, no real special operations, nothing, and no economics. It drives me nuts. And what we hear on the news today about, say, the war in Ukraine, are all these military officers talking about tactical and operational events on the ground in a sort of a World War II lens still. And, that's sort of reminds me of the French in the 1920s and 30s building a Maginot Line, because the future of war for them was more trench warfare. And as you all know, Germany evolved its way of warfare, invented the Blitzkrieg, and totally circumnavigated the Maginot Line. And I think today the U.S. sadly has a Maginot mentality. And we can talk more about that. But yeah, I hear things on the news all the time by people who should know better, who really are not with. They're fighting last century's wars and not this century.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then what do you see happening in the future of warfare? Where is warfare headed if it's not trench warfare or conventional units on the ground? Where is that going?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So in the future of war, as I see it, it's going to be a mixture of a couple of things. I mean, first of all, organized violence or war will never go away, in my opinion. It's tragically a part of human nature. I mean, no matter how enlightened we become, humans will find new ways of clobbering other humans. And there's reasons for that, resources and glory and, self-defense. But I think the future of war is not going to be big military formations. It's not going to be like you see this, whether it's like Star Wars movies of big military set piece battles. That's kind of the stuff of World War II and Napoleon. The future of war is going to be, let me back up again. We live in an information age. And we have for the last 30 years. I mean, as we were discussing before, you and I were playing kind of at home and trying to find people to play with, but now you can connect via the internet and globalization. It's a renaissance, Mm-hmm. And in an information age, weapons that maximize information become really important. Mm-hmm. So what that means is things like disinformation campaigns that we see Russia and China and Iran and others do. That is a way to win now. On the battlefield, you'll still have a battlefield, but it's not going to look like, D-Day. You're going to have small groups, and they're going to maximize plausible deniability. So in an information age, weapons that give you plausible deniability on the ground are now more important than, say, a tank unit. Because, put it this way, I mean, like, and we're seeing this everywhere, like, it's going to be like more covert. I call it shadow warfare. You're doing things beneath the threshold of international media. You're doing things that other people can disavow you because it gets in trouble. That's what the future of war is, in part. It's going to become much more at the strategic level about manipulating people's perceptions of reality through information warfare. And at the tactical level, it's going to be units to give you plausible deniability, like special forces or mercenaries or astroturf units. And then I also think another trend's happening is that war is gradually divorcing from the nation state. So that we're going to see an increase of like the Fortune 500, the world's billionaires, getting involved in warfare using mercenaries and some other things. And we're starting to see that world unravel. You may remember this is kind of the world of Philip K. Dick in the 1960s, a science fiction writer who really inspired William Gibson, who gave us sort of the cyberpunk genre. Yeah. But this idea where corporations and billionaires are superpowers in their own right. And I think we're going to see more of that in the future of war. I think we're going to see global slums. We're going to see, state and non-state actors who yield force in a very covert way. And we're going to see a lot of information warfare, stuff like that. So it's not going to be like flying jet cars. I mean, that might be a case, but it's not going to be, the Avengers, flying aircraft carrier. It's going to be this type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. So you really do feel like you mentioned, like the cyberpunk genre, where a corporation has a core of mercenaries that goes out and does things. And even a billionaire would just hire mercenaries. You really think that things are headed that way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look. So first of all, it's already happening right now. Okay. That way. Okay. And so I'm going to try to answer it. So many ways I can answer it. Mm-hmm. So for your viewers or listeners out there, my background is a little crazy. I ended up as a paratrooper in the U.S. Army Airborne, as an officer and paratrooper. I then left. I jumped to the dark side, became what they call a private military contractor. Some would say mercenary. I would not. But I worked all around the world, initially for the U.S. government, doing things that the CIA and Special Operations Forces would traditionally have done, and they outsourced it. And then I worked for private party, for corporations and stuff like that. So yeah, it's happening. And I think this trend is slowly and it's growing, and it's always under, again, this plausible deniability factor. It's always under the threshold of international attention. And that's the way they like it. They want maximum plausibility. They want, there's all sorts of things that are going on there. It's not just private. It's not like mercenaries alone. Like the mercenary world is also combining with the private intelligence world, which I worked in as well, like private CIAs. And there's an element, of course, of cyber hacker companies, and this triangle of connections. That is sort of the new way of war. We're already seeing it in Russia. So some of your listeners may have heard of the Wagner Group, which is like this Russian mercenary firm that's now in the battle of Ukraine, the war of Ukraine. But they are also work closely with the troll factory of Russia in St. Petersburg, which is called the Internet Research Agency. And there's a oligarch, Prigozhin, who owns that. And Prigozhin, he's close to Putin, but he's not the Russian state. He has his own private army called the Wagner Group, which are like special forces, where they kind of used to be. They're getting hammered right now in Ukraine. He's got his own cyber hackers called the Troll Factory. He's got a lot of oil and gas companies as well. And the way he works is he goes into the Middle East, he goes into Africa, always with Putin's blessing, but he does he uses his private army and cyber and oil companies to work the place over and get paid. So we're already seeing parts of this around the world. This trend is growing. It's just not covered very well in the United States, but it's definitely an uptrend.
Okay, no, that's fascinating, and yes, I'm feeling the kind of the sting of people who get most of our information from Hollywood movies or TV shows or books, and obviously,
well, it's funny. I also consult for Hollywood, and I try to break them of this, and I've consulted for Netflix a bit, but look, our notion of warfare. Again, just like U.S. military generals, by and large, not all generals, that Marines are doing some very interesting things right now. But they're also looking back the last successful war, which is World War II. And think about every year how many, Hollywood movies come out about World War II. Mm-hmm. Versus like Iraq or Afghanistan or Korea or Vietnam. I mean, every year there's yet at least one more Hollywood movie about World War II or the Holocaust. We make more Hollywood movies about that one war than all the other American wars combined. We're obsessed with it because it's our glory days. Yeah. I mean, and our paradigm of warfare for the American imagination is like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers. And I will tell you, that's a very sanitized version of the American experience in Europe in World War II. Right. The United States, those wars were pretty horrific. My grandfather fought and was shot during the Battle of Bulge. He was an American, left for dead, picked up by Belgian nurses or something, nursed back to health. He never spoke of the war. And I think most World War II vets never spoke of the war because the wounds were very deep mentally, versus today where, every every other SEAL is writing a memoir, it seems, So I think a lot of what America thinks about the war, both amongst sort of the mass population and the elites in Washington, is really still anchored in World War II, and it really is. It's very dangerous because war has moved on a lot since then.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, of course, it does speak to our glory days, but of course, I think there's pretty much a near universal agreement, right, that the bad guy in that war was really bad, right, and so the other ones are more muddy, right. When you're talking about something that's happening nowadays, you're just like, who's right, who's wrong gets muddied, doesn't it?
Well, not only that, but we have adversaries using global technology who kind of can infiltrate our airways about that type of stuff too. We have, again, you have trolls out of Russia, out of China, out of other places who are trying to always create false narratives in our own media cycle to conflate all this. I mean, we all know right now how, Russia, like Putin is telling the Russians that he's in Ukraine to denazify the place and act as peacekeepers, which to us is patently absurd. But, Russia has state-controlled media, and China even more so. China, you can't do Facebook, you can't do anything. It's all controlled out of Beijing. So, and those autocratic powers are also trying to spread false narratives here so that we question our own government's actions. It's a way of victory. I mean, victory is no longer just winning on battlefields. In fact, battlefield victory may be largely obsolete. There are other and more clever ways to win. And one of the ways to win is to fool your enemy's society that they're losing, or that their leaders are lying to them, or whatever. And I'm not trying to make a Republican or Democrat perspective here. It's really just, that's what, it's an information age weapon, is like the Twitter or deep fakes or all sorts of cunning things that people can do. So yeah, knowing if you're right, trying to sap your enemy's will to fight, that's all now on the table in ways that it wasn't back in World War II, and certainly wasn't during, say, the Civil War. So Yeah, like I said earlier, information technology changes warfare in profound ways. The smart know how to use it, and the dumb, frankly, don't.
Yeah. And, and I definitely wanted to say thank you for your service. It's people like you that allow me to play a game for a living, which is kind of ridiculous. And write for games.
I play games too.
Yeah. And write.
We don't want to be speaking Chinese or Russian.
Yeah, exactly. So I really do thank you for your service in the Army and that, and around the world. And just thinking about that, kind of in game terms, I really, there are cyberpunk games, there are near future games, and I haven't really seen one that really leans into the idea that the game master could be feeding their players false information through, their devices or whatever while their players are going on. And I thought that was an interesting idea. Yeah.
Well, war is becoming epistemological, right? So in philosophy, epistemology is sort of like asking the question of how do you know what you know?
Yeah.
Right. And really, the cognitive battlefield matters as much as the physical one today. And if you're a DM or a GM, you can do that, I suppose. I mean, it'd be very hard to track, but it's like this. Yeah. If you really want to think about the future of war, it's an intellectual terrain of extreme ambiguity. Mm-hmm. And not double meanings, but like all sorts of vying. You don't really know. It's really fog of war. So it's not like World War II, like you said earlier, where it was very, who was evil, who was good. It's the good war fought by the greatest generation. Today it's, in Vietnam was ambiguous. Yeah. Today it's even more so. And so how does ambiguity, get deployed as a weapon of war? That's kind of the new thing about warfare today. One of the new things.
Yeah. Yeah. You're also scaring me, but no, I try to think about these things, like I said, but that is your point about the epistemological nature is a powerful point, because because you could win the battle but surrender, right? You could lose a battle but claim you've won, and just by putting out Facebook posts or tweets, which seems like ridiculous on the surface, but you can see the power of that.
Well, Ukraine, is doing this as we speak. Yeah. President Zelensky, who's a former professional actor and comedian, is a master of messaging. I mean, Look, Russia, until recently, was the disinformation superpower. And here comes Zelensky, and the Ukrainians at large are totally outflanking Russia on the information front, how that's helped them. It has totally galvanized not just NATO, but international opinion for them. And that's how so they're turning Russia into North Korea, not using bullets on the ground, but using tweets and comedy and like all sorts of things. Perhaps some of your listeners have seen like the Saint Javelin stickers, and it's just like really funny. And of course, there's a lot of Ukrainian bravery too. I mean, Americans love an underdog, and they are indeed that. So, yeah, I think, some of the best weapons today don't fire bullets, and we need to figure out what does. And I strongly believe at the strategic level of war, you win by outsmarting your enemy, and not by outpowering them. It's a very Sun Tzuian concept. I mean, Sun Tzu is the ancient Chinese general, supposedly, who wrote The Art of War about 2,500 years ago. It's well worth reading again, and we could discuss it if you wish. But for him, war is strategic deception. It's not about battlefield glory. In fact, he says that the object of war is to win before the first shot is fired. It's about psyching out your enemy. It's about fooling them. It's about doing other things. It's David beating Goliath, really. Yeah. So, I think that's the future rather than, F-35s and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there was a lot there, but I do agree. I think the war in Ukraine was only a few days old, and I saw a video of President Zelensky. I think he was running through the street with some, and it was like, I was just like, that is brilliant. I mean, like, talk about using, because all you have to do is use an image, right? You just use that image, and now you have people like, oh, they're right on your side, right? He's with us. He's right there with us. So he galvanizes his own people, and then affects opinion, around the world. It's like, who else would do that? I mean, look at these, look what they're doing. I mean, it was amazing. I thought it was brilliant. And that.
No, it was. And look, I mean, it's good old fashioned leadership for one, but snappy lines like, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition, stuff like that, clever zingers, and he's full of them. But also there's also the dark arts. I mean, autocrats, people frame the future, there's some degree of accuracy to this, that it's between democracies and autocracies, and autocracies can easily fight this new way of war I discuss in my books, because they can control information, they can control the economy, they can control the military. They don't have public discourse, they don't have newspapers, they don't have Capitol Hill and C-SPAN or CNN or whatever. But the problem about autocracies is that they're very brittle, and Putin's ego is so large, it's hard to know where his ego ends and Russian foreign policy begins. And there's an opportunity there for a cunning strategist or a cunning gamer, because they're really the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is that, here's a guy, Putin, who rides around half naked on bears. Can't we do something with that? Can't we make a ridicule campaign to make the world laugh at him? Derision. Madison Avenue knows how to do this very, very well. So the answer is, we need to be a little clever. We need to start wading back into the dark arts of these things ourselves. And we can do that. We did that all during the Cold War. We just don't do it as much anymore. And there's some good reasons for that. There's some bad reasons for that. But I think we need to turn the volume up a little bit.
Yeah. And again, there's a couple things I want to follow up on. Of course, we're going to dive into your books here. But I think it was a few years back now that when I really realized, I guess, as a total layperson when it comes to like international affairs or whatever, but when Putin was like on vacation and he was swimming and he goes under the water and he comes up with amphorae, the Greek jars that, used to, they're like, 2,500 years old or whatever. He comes up with an amphorae, and it's like he found it. And, and it was this big photo op. And then, of course, like a week later, his people say, well, yeah, we planted it. So what? But like, but the picture goes around, the picture just went all around. Right. I saw the picture on Facebook. I saw it everywhere. Right. And and that's when, I really started understanding, I guess, for at least me, just seeing like, it's all about that image. Right. It's not even about what's true, because they admit it as true. But who listened to the part that
it's too late, right?
Yeah, it's too late.
No, it's about you win through framing things, but by manipulating people's perception of reality. If you can manipulate their perception of reality, you're manipulating the reality at some level. And it's not just one thing. You have to, these campaigns are very nuanced. They're very layered. It's multiple touch points across the whole society. And, Russia and others are trying to do this. And so do private sector as well. This is not new. This is what Madison Avenue gets paid to do for a living. But war is becoming, because of information, it's impacting all these things. And I think my bigger point is that victory goes to the cunning more than the strong these days. Yeah. And we need, strategic IQ matters a lot more than how many missiles you have or, kinetic firepower. I mean, those still matter, but they matter less than they did 100 years ago. In fact, things like battlefield victory, like I said earlier, may not matter at all. I mean, some of us may remember in 2003, and after the Iraq War started, President George W. Bush, was on landed on an aircraft carrier to give a big speech with a mission accomplished banner behind him saying we had won. We had achieved perfect battlefield victory over the Iraq military, which is conventional war. It's World War II. Battlefield victory determines winners and losers. But in 2003, it was irrelevant to the Iraq war. And same like during Vietnam, we won every battle, yet we lost the war. And it's not just us, it's like the USSR and Afghanistan, and it's France and Indochina or Vietnam. This is the last 70 years of war. It's really been about who's more clever rather than who's more strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, your point about the one-liners, I think it speaks volumes about perhaps our culture, and that we want Arnold Schwarzenegger or Chuck Norris or somebody just to give a one-liner and beat the bad guy or whatever it is. Speaking from my generation, which the popular movies of the 80s and 90s or whatever. And it also does bring up a scary point of view about people's attention spans, that if we can't pay attention long enough to see what the truth is, has some kind of terrifying implications there. But I definitely want to dive into your books. I could keep talking to you about this all day, by the way, but sure. I will respect your time. I want to dive into your books because, of course, you've written some books that are nonfiction. They talk about these things that we've been talking about. They talk about mercenaries. They talk about that kind of world. They talk about the future of warfare. But then you've also started writing novels, and I'm wondering why leave the nonfiction to pursue fiction?
Well, I pursue both right now. It's actually, first of all, it's really hard to write fiction and nonfiction. It's either one or the other. There's very few people who do both. There are some people, but it's very rare. Mm-hmm. Isaac Asimov was one of those. I'm not Isaac Asimov. It seems like he published a book every 3 seconds. Yeah. I like to do both, but they use different parts of the brain. So when I put down a nonfiction book that I've been writing, I can't just take 2 weeks off and start a fiction book. It takes like 3 months. It's hard to describe. My brain has to rewire itself. I don't know what, but So, first of all, my last nonfiction book is called The New Rules of War. It is written in an accessible manner, but the ideas are very deep and rigorous. So it's written so my mother could read it. It's written so you could read it in an airport. It's kind of fun to read, and I use a lot of fiction skill to make it so. But it's also written so that 4-star generals, and senators and scholars can understand it too. And it kind of lays out these ideas about the future of war. In this book, The New Rules of War, I say, hey, look, the future of war looks different than the type of war, the West is preparing to fight. Here are 10 new rules about how to fight and win. And I talk about, first of all, how conventional war, big military against big military, that stuff is an antiquated form of warfare. And, assuredly enough, Putin tries to invade, Ukraine into this year with a conventional force, conventional warfare, and totally gets his shoelaces tied together by the Ukrainians, right? Conventional war doesn't work anymore. What does work are like these, what I call shadow warfare. It's like these small units, like guerrilla warfare units, who work they fight in sort of in clandestine and covert ways, which is what Ukrainians are doing right now. And they are, blowing up Chanks with Javelin missiles. They are stopping Putin's $1 billion a day invasion with a relatively cheap, $150,000 missile. So that's the future, and also how mercenaries are getting involved in modern warfare. The Wagner Group is Russia's mercenary corps, and they're pretty brutal. But also there'll be foreign legions, and sure enough, the Ukrainians have created a foreign legion. It's just I made some predictions a few years ago that currently have spelled itself out. And the book is being read widely within not just U.S. national security circles, but also national security circles in Europe, in NATO, in the Pacific Rim, like Japan and Singapore. And it's because a lot of people see that the future of war is not going to be aircraft carrier groups, submarines, tanks, fighter jets. It's going to be, those will still have a role, but a much less role. It's going to be other things. It's going to be like disinformation and cyber and sneaky warfare and, all that. And that can actually win. So that's, so the things that we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes, this book spells out pretty clearly about this new way of warfare and how to think about it and how to win.
No, that sounds fascinating. And then what about your fiction then?
So the fiction started actually as a memoir. I mean, so the fiction, well, basically, I tell the same story, but through fiction as well. Mm-hmm. So, nonfiction, is powerful, but I think fiction is also a great way to tell a story, just like gaming is. It's a great way to think things out and to follow narrative. And my fiction was totally by accident. I was in the private military world for many years. I got out. I wanted to write a memoir about something I had done that was really interesting. I led a motley crew in Africa. There was going to be a Rwanda-like genocide. Some of you will remember the Rwanda Genocide in 1994-93 era. 800,000 Hutu and Tutsis, slaughtered in 3 months. It's horrendous. Makes Iraq and Afghanistan look pretty tame. The CIA had solid intelligence that on the 10th anniversary of that massacre, that genocide, there's some genocideers in the Congo who wanted to restart it. And they were going to assassinate the president of Burundi, a nearby nation next to Rwanda, to start the death spiral of Hutus killing Tutsis and vice versa. And my job was hired by the U.S. government to go in there and stop it without people in the U.S. Embassy knowing about it. Some people in the U.S. Embassy knew about it, but most did not. And we succeeded. We stopped a genocide that would have been, massively devastating. And I want to tell that story. But my editor, my agent said, no. If you do this, you'll be sued to death. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do? He says, well, turn it into fiction. So we turned it into fiction, but we did change the location because I didn't want to get certain names and people in trouble. So it follows, it's sort of an autobiographical tale. It follows this guy called Tom Locke, who is it's like an Ivy League mercenary, who used to play a musical instrument and he finds himself, kind of sliding into the mercenary world from an elite U.S. military background, and it has an epiphany that maybe this is not morally cool. And then he gets stuck in this world. And there's a couple of things going on. One, it's a really fun, I've written 3 of these books. It's called the Tom Locke series. And the last book came out, it's called High Treason, and it's really good. And you don't have to read them in order. You can read them any way you like. But James Patterson said it's better than Tom Clancy, and I have to, I'm going to throw that out there because it was hard earned. I didn't, he's not a friend of mine. It came out of nowhere. They're fun page turners. But they also reveal this new type of warfare that I discuss in the New Rules of War that we've been discussing right now, that we're seeing in the world right now. It also pulls back the curtain on the mercenary world today, which is something that not many people know about. I know about it very intimately. It's scarier than most people assume. Mercenaries today, at least Tier 1 mercenaries, are very, very lethal. Last year they assassinated the president of Haiti, and got away with it. And they do things for, again, Fortune 500 and billionaires that most people would assume is science fiction. It's not. And we're heading into that world. So fiction allows me to paint that picture with a lot freer brush than, strictly nonfiction. And that's why I like writing fiction, nonfiction, both. It's 2 ways to tell a similar tale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a power in fiction that, and of course we've seen this with numerous examples that we may shun something that is presented, as fact, but if fiction can draw us in and open us up to new ideas that we weren't really willing to think about. We've seen that in many genres with many books or TV shows. The original Star Trek, comes to mind, and different things or the original Twilight Zone was one of those that makes us think about things that we weren't willing to think about, but we get hooked into the fiction. And I think that is there's a powerful, a powerful way that fiction has with us, right? That we get hooked in it, and we then will kind of open ourselves up to see something that we wouldn't necessarily seen, right? If we're presented with the nonfiction version, sometimes our walls go up, right? We put up our defenses, and but fiction has a way of hooking us and then making us think about it because they hook us with the story, right?
Yeah, I mean, nonfiction is about making an argument. Fiction is about immersing you in a universe.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a quote from one of the old martial art directors from Hong Kong. He said, when people go to the movies, he said, I don't want them to think, I want them to feel when they go to my movie. Right. And so when we read fiction or we watch, a fiction movie, we feel something more than we think about it. And I think that's an interesting thing. But and I've had you on here for a while. I do want to respect your time. Why don't you just let us know? So you're talking about the Tom Locke novels. Before I let you go, I'll squeeze in. You have, like, if by my recollection, like 14 day jobs. So how do you squeeze in, a lot of my audience are writers. They want to publish, and they want to, and we're swamped with kids and families and jobs and all kinds of stuff. How do you squeeze in time to write?
It's really hard. I mean, in my experience writing, you need like the 4 to 6 best hours of your day uninterrupted. Yep. And that's extremely hard to find in modern life. And, I going into the pandemic, I was thinking like, boy, this is going to be great. I'll have a lot of writing time. And of course, I have a 6-year-old son. Impossible. It was totally impossible. And it's really hard to do. And what I try to do is I try to wall off 3 months of my life where I can sort of do that, which is hard to achieve for lots of reasons. And, so that's one problem. The other problem is that the book world, as your writers probably know, is like upside down. The book world has never figured out what to do with Amazon or anything else. It's also really hard to get discovered now as an author. So, back like Matt, when you and I were, younger, back in the, Mesozoic era or something, you would walk into a bookstore, Barnes and Noble, and look for a novel, but you had an open mind and you could discover new books that way. You might go in for one book, you come out with another or 3 others because you're just browsing. Today, you really can't browse on Amazon. You have to Google search basically what you want. It's like a sniper shot, and it makes it really hard to be discovered. And what's happening is that what that's doing to the book market is that, basically only a very small handful of authors get all the attention. And they're usually ones who own TV shows with ghostwriters because that's how people get introduced. So today, if you're an author, you don't have a TV show like Tucker Carlson or somebody else like me. I don't own a TV show. It's really hard to find an audience. The audience is out there, but there's a huge disconnect. And the publishing world doesn't know how to think about it. So, I would say to people is that, don't give up writing. Because that'd be very pessimistic, but I'm not sure if Stephen King were young today, I don't know if he'd be famous. So if you feel like you're having no traction, know that it's not you. It's like the whole world the whole writing and publication world is insane. So you may be sane in an insane world. That's cold comfort, but know that you're not alone. Even like big time writers I've talked to, whose names I won't talk about, they're having frustrations too. I mean, people like you've all heard of them. it's getting really hard. And if you really, and it seems today the purpose of a book is to get it made into a TV show, but the chances of that are like, I'm talking to Marvel Studios right now about Tom Warlock, but I am fully aware of, the chance of me getting that to a mini series or to a movie it's like getting eaten by a great white shark. I mean, I'll take on those odds, but it's really challenging these days. So yeah, but don't give up. And also writing, even if you don't publish, really, it's a real good exercise for your brain muscle. It really is good. You don't know what you know until you have to write it down, whether it's fiction, nonfiction. So there's a lot of other reasons. And I would say lastly, as a former GM a long time ago, it really sharpens those skills too. So keep up the narrative, keep up the effort. It's just hard to become like a John Grisham or a Stephen King these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I mean, something you didn't even mention, I self-publish all of my books, and it's opened up a whole new, I mean, it's cliche, but it's a whole new world of different things, and I know. And it's crazy because I mean, I do that full time, right? Like I self-publish full time, which is ridiculous, which couldn't have happened. I don't even think in like 2014 or, like it couldn't have happened even just a few years ago. And so that's amazing.
Well, I leave it to you to solve. I haven't done that route, so I don't feel expert, but I'm really happy it's out there. And I think it's always about trying to find the audience, and there's an audience trying to find you too. It's like this strange intermediary by accident that's a cause of some frustration.
Yeah, we can, I mean, nowadays we can do anything, right? I mean, you can write, one person can write a book and publish it by themselves. You can make a feature film with the device I have in my pocket and put it on the internet. But the problem is people can't find you, right? People can't find you. So, of course, that's what I used to do in my day job before I left was search engine optimization keywords. And so that helps me a bit when I self-publish, but it's all about those keywords. And like you said, the search on Amazon. So if anybody's out there and you're self-publishing, or even if you're publishing traditionally, make sure your publisher understands that you should have keywords in your Amazon description, and things like that, because those are big. But yeah, I thank you so much for your insight. Why don't you just let people know, where can people learn more about you? Where can they find your books and all that stuff?
So I have a website, SeanMcFate.com. That's SeanMCF as in Foxtrot, ATE.com. My books are listed there. I also have a ad hoc YouTube channel. I'm also a professor at the War College in Washington, D.C., where I teach the military how to win wars. And I have lectures on YouTube that I put up there during COVID. So if you want to watch some War College lectures by me, they're free. You can do it. You could, of course, find my books on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. They come in, ebooks, Audible, regular books in a hardback, softcover. And I have quite a few books out there, and they're meant to be thought-provoking as well as fun. So they're not just me sort of spoon-feeding confirmation bias to people, telling people what they want to hear. It's meant to sort of stretch one's imagination a bit in good ways. And I hope you find them very compelling.
Yeah, and I will be sure to put a link to your website and also your books and your YouTube channel in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who is listening right now, you can just head over there, and in the show notes, you'll find those links so you can check out those books. Well, Sean, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I could keep you talking all day. I have like a million more questions, but I will respect your time. Absolutely. And just thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your insight. I think there's a lot here that we could get as writers or game masters. And I mean, frankly, just like I said, as a father or parent, thinking about the future of war and what this world is going to look like when we leave it to our inheritors. So I thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. And let me know if you want to have another conversation at some point about like what might corporate warfare look like in 2040,
that would be
like that.
Yes, that would be amazing. I'm gonna make a note of that.
We can even maybe have a couple guests, and I have some experience in that world and where it may be trending, and with lot to discuss there. So anytime, and it's great being on your show. Thank you very much.
All right, there you have it, guys. Oh my goodness. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sean today. It was fascinating just to be able to pick his brain about the future of warfare. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned a lot. I know an episode like this may not seem like it has a lot of application to gaming, but I assure you it does. Some of these ideas can inform our gaming with misinformation or disinformation or controlling reality. As game masters, that is what we are doing in some sense all the time, really. But really using that on our players or on the player characters, I should say, I think is very, very powerful. It is just a tool that you can add to your Game Master toolkit. As I mentioned in the show, you will find links to Sean's books, his novels, his website, his YouTube channel in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. If you head over there right now, you will find those links. Trust me, you want to do so. And I cannot wait to have him back on the show to discuss what corporate warfare would look like in 2040. That would be fascinating. All right. If you want some free stuff, guys, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 20 free dungeon maps and all kinds of other stuff. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks. You can also, at dicegeeks.com, find my books, which help you run better games and cut down your GM prep time. All right, if you want to help the show out in some way, you can like, rate, review, and subscribe. If you want to help out the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. And until next Wednesday, keep gaming.